All right, I'd just like to welcome you back. We just completed our study of chapter 29 on a prophecy against Egypt. I'm sorry. Yes, a prophecy against Egypt. And then now we're going to be in chapter 30, which is a lament over Egypt. And I remember telling you last time that we've got 4 chapters that we're going to study. Chapter 30 will be the second, that has to do with prophecies against Egypt. Very interesting stuff. All right, here we're going to talk about the devastation or desolation of Egypt again. Let's look at verses 1 through 9. Let me read all of 1 through 9. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, prophesy and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Wail and say, alas for that day, for the day is near, the day of the Lord is near, a day of clouds, a time of doom for the nations. The nations. A sword will come against Egypt, and anguish will come upon Cush. When the slain fall in Egypt, her wealth will be carried away and her foundations torn down. Verse 5, Cush and Lydia, and all Arabia, Cub and the people of the covenant land will fall by the sword along with Egypt. This is what the Lord says, verse 6, the allies of Egypt will fall and her proud strength will fail. From Migdol to Aswan, they will fall by the sword within her, declares the sovereign Lord. They will be desolate among desolate lands, and their cities will lie among ruined cities. They will know that I am the Lord when I set fire to Egypt, and all her helpers are crushed. I hope you're seeing here that this desolation of Egypt is real. This is not a storybook time. This was real. On that day, in verse 9, on that day messengers will go out from me in ships to frighten Cush out of her complacency. Anguish will take hold of them on the day of Egypt's doom, for it is sure to come. Verse 10, I will stop there at verse 9. So in verse 1, we don't get a date. Ezekiel doesn't give a date on this prophecy. But in verse 3, he talks about the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord occurs many times in the Bible. It's a general day. It can mean one of many different things. But here, it's fulfilled by Babylon. If you go back to chapter 29, where we're in chapter 29, but no, we're in chapter 30. It's a day of judgment for the nations and of human history. Pretty interesting. The day of blessing and deliverance for Israel. Here it is used as the approaching day of those are various days, a day of the Lord. It can be a general day of judgment. It can be a judgment of nations and human history. It can be a day of blessing and deliverance for Israel. If you recall, so just kind of a word of review and thinking back on the very beginning of our study here, and even in Hosea, there were four false beliefs that the Jews were living under. I'm not even sure I can remember all of them, but they believed that they would get protection because of God's covenant, that he can't violate that. They believed that they would get protection from God and they would not fall to Babylon because they lived in Jerusalem, the city of God. city he put his name on. They can't fall because the temple is there, and he would never allow his temple to be destroyed. The fourth one was that the day of the Lord meant victory for God, but it also means victory for the Jews. That was a false assumption, and that's what we're talking about here. This day of the Lord, we're seeing God was victorious over everything. You know, he led Babylon to be his rod of discipline for everybody. He's using them to conquer Judah. He's using them to conquer Israel. He's using them to conquer all those neighboring lands around Egypt and Judah. So we're talking about the day of the Lord. Here it's a day fulfilled by Babylon. All right, so verses 4 and 5 are pretty impressive. It's a pretty impressive list of countries who will be judged by the sword. Verse 4 and 5, he lists them off. It's Egypt, Cush, Libya, Lydia, Arabia, Cub, and that sort of thing. The people of the covenant land, you know who that is. That's got to be Judah. They're going to fall by the sword along with Egypt. So it's going to be a domino effect. He's starting up the coast with Tyre, and even further north than that, coming down the coast, just conquering all of these little empires, little cities, little nations along the way, conquering them. They're just following one after the other like dominoes. They get to Tyre, then he comes on down. He's going to get Judah. Then after he gets Judah, he's coming for Egypt, the country that participated with Judah in the double cross of Babylon. So it's pretty impressive. And then verse 6, the allies of Egypt will fall. Look at verse 6, just so we understand it. This is what the sovereign Lord says. The allies of Egypt will fall, and her proud strength will fail. So there was a lot of these neighboring countries that depended on Egypt for support. Judah was one of them. We already see that they were like a reed that broke when they leaned on it. They couldn't provide any support at all and protection. The same thing happened to the other countries, cities and countries around there. They leaned on Egypt for support. Turns out Egypt's going to fall, and along with them, all of their allies are going to fall with them. All right, verse 7 says that it's going to be, they will be desolate among desolate lands, and their cities will lie among ruined cities. That's verse 7. That's the same. It was used in Egypt in chapter 29:12. It said, 29:12 said they lie desolate for 40 years among ruined cities. That's what we're talking about. That's what Babylon's doing to the area. It's ruining everything. Okay, so verse 9 says, messengers will tell the allies about the plight of Egypt, and fear of doom would come over the allies. So they're going to hear about all this stuff. Chapter 30, verse 9 says, on that day messengers will go out from me in ships to frighten Cush out of their complacency. Anguish will take hold of them on the day of Egypt's doom, for it is sure to come. So word's going to get out. There's going to be messengers spreading the news. All right? And the fear of doom is going to spread over the land. All right, verses 10 through 19 is the next section we want to look at. Verses 10 and 12. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I will put an end to the hordes of Egypt by the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. He's going to be the sword. In verse 11, he and his army, the most ruthless of nations, will be brought in to destroy the land. Who's going to bring them in? God's going to bring them in. You're the man, Nebuchadnezzar. They will draw their swords against Egypt and will fill the land with the slain. Verse 12, I will dry up the waters of the Nile and sell the land to an evil nation by the hand of foreigners. I will lay, by the hand of foreigners, by the hand of foreigners I will lay waste the land and everything in it. I, the Lord, have spoken. Okay, it's pretty clear. Nebuchadnezzar is going to wield a big sword. He's the most ruthless of nations. He's going to kill people. He's going to loot and plunder the land, and he's going to lay waste to the land and everything in it. It's pretty fierce. There was not a lot of mercy shown by the Babylonians, and you can see this every time we read about what they do. It's fierce. It's fierce what they do to the people that they get in the lands that they come in contact with. All right, verses 13 to 19. Let's look at that. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I will destroy it. Now, this is what you really need to hear. This is what got it all rolling. I will destroy the idols and put an end to the images in Memphis. That's not Tennessee, by the way. No longer will there be a prince in Egypt, and I will spread fear through the land. I will lay waste Upper Egypt, set fire to Zoan, and inflict punishment on Thebes. I will pour out my wrath on Pelusium, the stronghold of Egypt, and wipe out the hordes of Thebes. Verse 16, I will set fire to Egypt. Pelusium will writhe in agony. Thebes will again be taken by storm. Memphis will be in constant distress. The young men of Heliopolis and Bubastis will fall by the sword, and the cities themselves will go into captivity. There it is. They're taking them into captivity. Verse 18, dark will be the day of Tahpanhes when I break the yoke of Egypt. There her proud strength will come to an end. That's the strength of Egypt will come to an end. She will be covered with clouds and her villages will go into captivity. So I will inflict punishment on Egypt and they will know that I am the Lord. Not a lot to add to that, I guess. Let me just see what I can say about that. Verse 13 says, there will no longer be a prince in Egypt. That's what they said back in Judah. Not going to be a king anymore. If you don't have a king, you don't have government. If you don't have government, you don't have a country. If you don't have government, you have no organization. So there's no leadership. No leadership, no government. No government, no country. But it did say, I almost went right past this. It says in verse 13, I believe it was, I will destroy the idols and put an end to the images in Memphis. I will destroy the idols. When I've already, I can't remember if I did it in this chapter or in chapter 29, but I mentioned that Egypt was not atheistic. They just didn't believe in Yahweh. They had over 400 gods and idols that they believed in, that they worshipped, and that they believed. Actually, they assigned power to them and authority and areas of influence to them. Well, God says, I'm putting an end to that. You recall Judah, you recall Northern Kingdom. They were very idolatrous. They got into this business of worshiping Baal and mixing the Baal, worship of Baal with worship of Yahweh to the point it got so ingrained in it that they couldn't tell the difference between the Yahweh and Baal. And they eventually thought it was one God with two different names. He put an end to that. And he was successful in doing that. He crushed traditional idolatry in Judah, in Israel. It's not coming back, hasn't come back, is not going to come back. He did the same thing here in all of these neighboring lands. It says here, I will destroy the idols and put an end to the images. Okay, verse 18 to 19, the summary is, I've already read it, the summary. it's still talking about Egypt and other countries that are going to be crushed. He says they're going to know this is something Pharaoh knew during Exodus. If you recall, Moses was going to lead the people out of Israel. They were in Israel under slavery in Egypt for 430 years. And Moses marches right in there under direction and orders from God and support from God and protection from God, and tells Moses, we're leaving. Let these people go. What did Moses say? I don't think so. Why would I let them go? Well, by the time God got through with him, he let them go, and he knew why he was letting them go, because he knew that God did it. All right? It's the same thing here. It's done in such a way they know that God did it. All right, verse 20 to 26 is some more metaphors, which I think you'll find are interesting. I'll just read that to you. I want you to pay attention to this, and I want you to listen for terms of weakness, pictures of weakness, and who that weakness is assigned to, and who has the positions of strength, and who it is assigned to. So let me read verses 20 to 26. It's fairly long, but it's interesting. Chapter 30, verses 20 through 26. In the 11th year, in the first month, on the 7th day, the word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, I have broken the arm of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. It has not been bound up to be healed or put in a splint so that it may become strong enough to hold a sword. That's the first thing. I broke his arm, and it's not going to heal. Verse 22, therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I'm against Pharaoh, king of Egypt. I will break both his arms. So there's a second thing. He's going to break both arms. The good arm as well as the broken one. So he had a broken one. Now he's going to get his other arm broken and make the sword fall from his hand. You got two broken arms, you can't hold a sword. I will disperse the Egyptians among the nations and scatter them through the countries. Okay, they're going to be defeated, and they're going to be scattered. Babylon's going to scatter them. I've already told you that. And he says in 24, I will strengthen the arms of the king of Babylon like he needs any strength. He's going to be fighting a man with two broken arms. Doesn't going to need much. And I'll put my sword in his hand, but I will break the arms of Pharaoh, and he will groan before him like a mortally wounded man. So there again, he reiterates he's got two broken arms. Can't do much fighting with two broken arms. I will strengthen the arms of the king of Babylon. There it is again. He's reiterating the strong is the king of Babylon, but the arms of Pharaoh will fall limp. They're broken. How else can they be? Then they will know I am the Lord, when I put my sword into the hand of the king of Babylon and he brandishes it against Egypt. What a picture that must be. You got a king, strong man, the guy that's strong has a sword, he's brandishing it. That's a position of warfare, a position of fighting. And he's standing over a guy with two broken arms. Come on, get up and fight, man. You don't need any arms to fight with. Well, I'm sure there was some daunting like that, but the idea here is that the king of Babylon is the strong. Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, is the weak. I will disperse the Egyptians among the nations and scatter them through the countries, and they will know that I am the Lord. They're going to be scattered. They're going to be defeated by Babylon, and Babylon's going to ship them out of their land of their ancestors and into the nations. We already know they're going to be returned after 40 years from the other chapter. Okay, so the key ideas here are that the weakness of Egypt and the strength of Babylon. Pharaoh has two broken arms, which will fall limp. So he's living in total weakness when it comes to fighting the Babylonians. The king of Babylon will brandish his sword, which is a fighting posture. Pulls that sword out and stands up over the guy, whoever his opponent is, and brandishes his sword. The king of Babylon will fight a weak man, the Pharaoh, who has two broken arms. The interesting part is that the strength of Babylon by comparison to the weakness of Egypt is such that he didn't need a sword. All he needed to do is blow on that weak man, he'd probably fall over. But it's an emphasis on the relative strengths of the two countries. Then what? They will know that I am the Lord. It will be very apparent that it's God that took care of all this. The great civilization of Egypt would exist only in ruins and historical records. Now, I'm through with that chapter. So we finished two chapters now, 29 and 30. But what I want to help you understand is that this prophecy against Egypt being defeated and devastated and being a desolation of the king of Babylon, by the king of Babylon, it's not permanent. When we read about Edom, we talked about them being defeated, never to be heard of again, almost wiped from existence of world records, records of the nations. We talked about Ammon and Moab in the same way. That's not what this is. This is defeat and desolation and devastation, but only for 40 years. God is going to bring them back. It's a grace of God to allow them to continue to exist, but it's not the grace that what is important here. We're looking at verse 16 back in chapter 29, and it says they're being brought back to be a reminder of Judah's sin in turning to Egypt for help and support and protection. All right, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for studying with me.